argument that Ween is the greatest band of all time. Of course, the band Ween formed in the 80s. Bunch of, two high school friends, Aaron Freeman and Mickey Melchiondo, in New Hope, Pennsylvania. They met in a typing class, and they had similar taste in music, and they started jamming together, releasing little cassette albums. The Crucial Squeegee Lip one was called. Very funny stuff. Very funny stuff. If you've ever listened to the early Ween cassette tapes, they're very rough. They're very raw, but also very endearing because they were like 16 years old. And I think that's the quality of Ween that obviously Ween is not the greatest band no band is the greatest band of all time. The wanting to name a band the greatest band of all time is a fool's errand. There's no criteria. It is subjective. By sales, by influence. You can't measure influence. If you measured, greatness by sales, then that's, very shallow, But so greatest, as I'm defining it, is my favorite, or the band that is greatest to me, or the band that probably most represents my outlook and how I feel. The music that I would make if I could make music. Well, I do make music, but my music, it sounds a lot like Ween very frequently. So there you go. Yeah, so I think they are the greatest in that respect, in that they are my favorite, because of a couple of factors. One was something that I already mentioned, is that relatability. To me, they are a band that I feel like I have shared their experiences, especially those first three albums, and especially their demo tapes. Sort of, if you're a sensitive kid, if you're a music kid in high school and you're making your shitty little rock tapes, I was doing this like Ween, and then they became, they eventually stuck with it and became, big indie heroes. So it's like if you had stuck with it and became like a big indie hero. You had stuck with your weird, jokey little songs that you made in your bedroom and were not very good, but you just kept on working at it and kept promoting yourself, and were just so boundlessly creative and driven that you eventually turn those little works into masterpieces, into genre-spanning masterpieces. So it is that relatability factor, especially the first three albums, which are God, Ween, Satan, The Pod, and Pure Guava. And they have sort of a lo-fi production quality, a very homemade quality. Even though they were produced in studios, they were produced by, I believe, Andrew Weiss, who was of Rollins' band, who was also the bassist for a lot of it, called Mean Ween, good old Mean Ween. But they do have a homemade quality. There's, lots of woogly synths, lots of heavily overdriven guitar, outtakes that are kept in, they're giggling. But that lends to that homemade or intimate quality. Like, this was something that was made just for them and their friends, and somehow it got out. But it was, it was so compelling, or it was so well composed, or so genuinely funny at some points, or so harrowingly, just relatable, as I said before. And I guess where that relatability comes from is those albums in particular really emotionally articulate what it's like to be from somewhere where there's not a lot going on. And you're sort of like a doughy, medium attractive, not really attractive dude, and you're in a place that sucks, like New Hope, Pennsylvania, and, or you're just in some sort of sleepy suburb, you're in some sort of exurb, you're in some sort of, place where it's just hard to access any culture. But, what's more is that looming in the distance is Philadelphia or New York, some great font of culture, and, you're just always tantalizingly close to being there, but you can never get there because you're just kicking the can. You don't have the means to get out of this sort of one-horse town, or at least it really feels like it in like your early 20s or something like that. And so, yeah, just being a dirtbag, just kicking the dirt around in a forgotten or lonely place, with you and your small amount of friends, and you're doing a lot of drugs because you lack a sense of direction. That, like, there is no fucking finer music that captures that very specific feeling that I think a ton of us have been through, that everybody that most people I talk to, that is their existence. They grow up in sort of a lonely place where it's hard to meet people. There are very few options for entertainment. You sort of are just driving around everywhere. You're ordering the pollo asado. It's really you're ordering the pork roll, egg, and cheese. Your life is centered around junk food. You're you're going to get drugs from your friend, the reggae junkie Jew. I knew a reggae junkie Jew. I bought drugs from a reggae junkie Jew. It was like they were. This is what it's like, just being sort of like a drug doing dirtbag. They know it. They know it intimately. So yeah, I think that's what I really like about the pod. Forget sunny day real estate. Forget freaking. Forget freaking the Arcade Fire, the suburbs. Once again, I choose to hate on Arcade Fire. I choose to indulge my hater mentality and say, fuck that band. Fuck that stupid band. The suburbs, ooh, everyone's sad and it's all so epic and the planes are soaring and there's big-ass reverb and we're all teenagers at the end of the world. I know that's not how the song goes, but yeah, or even Green Day's, rock opera American Idiot version of it. This, like, there is an aggrandizement, which is like, while at once you want to aggrandize your life in the suburbs, you want to turn your terrible life into, not your terrible life, but just your mundane life, your crushingly mundane life, and, this sense that things are slowly getting worse. You want to translate that into a big epic Jesus of Suburbia, or like a big epic Arcade Fire, the suburbs. But really what it is, it's just dismal and boring and mundane and sort of funny and stupid. And that's why I like Ween, because it acquaints you more with reality. It doesn't take you out of it. It doesn't try to, offer you a fantasy version of it. It, in fact, even says, don't get too close to my fantasy. But, yeah, I think that's what I like about it. And, the other band that I mention a lot as my favorite band is the Minutemen, another band of guys from, like, a lonely, weird place, San Pedro, who, just sort of drove around a lot. In fact, their big album is just about driving because that's all you could do when you're in these sort of isolated situations. And they also, I feel, because they had that whole We Jam Econo mentality, they produced a music that was less about showing reality and blowing it up into something that enhanced it, but rather just depicting it in a way that seemed like it actually was. This was the sound of mundanity, but because it's it's composed well, and because it's melodic, and because great arrangements, it's made listenable. This mundanity is accentuated but not fantasized, I suppose, which is the quality of Ween and the Minutemen that I really liked. And it made it more believable. I mean, eventually, you know, Ween would become a little more grandiose. And I would say, you know, their best album of all time is probably their most grandiose album. That's Quebec, of course. But I think how they initially hook you. I mean, the first Ween album I heard was Chocolate and Cheese. And I thought that album was good. I liked that album a lot. But when I finally got to hearing the earlier ones, especially God, Ween, Satan, I was like, okay, these are people that know everything that I've ever thought and been through, because they too have experienced all this real dumb stuff. I mean, Chocolate and Cheese is great on its own, but it somehow the first three albums all managed to be little concept albums, even though they're not intended as such. But it's just in my head, I call it the New Hope trilogy because it's those albums are really about being in a fucking small town and like huffing ether or like doing nitrous through a weird mask that you made and like looking at the glue traps in your kitchen and spacing out for a while. So let's talk about them in more depth. You know, let's go into the I wanna review all their studio albums. Just talk about all their studio albums in a row. I'm not going to talk about their live albums, which are all really good. I might talk about Shinola or Craters of the Sack. Who knows? We'll see when we get there. But yeah, so you have the first three albums: God, Ween, Satan, The Oneness, The Pod, and Pure Guava. So let's go to God, Ween, Satan, The Oneness. This is their very first album. I think they're like 20 years old when they make this, which is just crazy. That you know, you should hear people think this is rough sounding. You know, you should hear the music that I made at age 20. You know, they definitely sounds a lot rougher. And the quality of this as well is, you know, it's part of it, that sort of tinny, as some would describe it. There's a sort of tinny quality to it, sort of very trebly sounding. But I like that. I like that it has this sort of fly or buzzing like quality. I think it sort of adds to it in a way because it adds to that homemade quality. But people have described it as a smorgasbord before, and it is indeed a smorgasbord. Just lots and lots of material, tons of unforgettable melodies, and like, don't laugh, I love you. Don't laugh. It's a great song. It's a great song, Don't Laugh, I Love You. Never squeal on a pusher. Don't lie to your mama. Just do as you want and it'll be all right. That's something that I repeat to myself day after day after day. But also, I guess I say unforgettable melodies. There are plenty of forgettable melodies on here. It's like, it's a very rough format. A lot of the songs feel like half finished, but that's part of it as well. That's what makes it beautiful. That these are sort of fragmentary ideas, and they just keep varying it up, and they keep changing on you over and over and over again. Even at this early stage, they have that sonic diversity. You know, you have You Fucked Up, the first song, which is an amazing way to start your career. You fucked up, you bitch. You really fucked up. Which, you know, I don't know if they would get clowned for misogyny these days. A lot of their songs definitely are of their era and feature a sense of humor that, you know, I don't think they were trying to hurt anybody or anything like that. But you could probably get away with this stuff. Who am I kidding? You know, I don't think people would take much issue with what they say. But one time because of you fucked up, they say, you fucked up, you fucking Nazi whore. You know, one time I tried to, I called someone a Nazi whore on Facebook, and then someone chastised me for using the word whore. And I was like, oh, that's what happens, you know. That's, whatever, though. It's funny. I know they're a Nazi, but should you really be calling them a whore? it's funny. And then they immediately vary it up with Tick, which is sort of this rigid, Devo-y, up-tempo punk number, as opposed to that dismal crust punk that just came in before. And then you get track number 3, I'm in the Mood to Move, this textural piece, which is just made up of like a bass line and slowed down voices, which, of course, you know, slowed down and sped up voices become a staple of Ween. They contribute to the comedy. The wonderful comedy. I guess that's something that I can also get into while we're on the first album. Of course, Ween is associated with comedy, right? And there's lots of musical acts that incorporate humor into the song craft. Some are known more than others for it. Of course, you have people like Frank Zappa, who is known for being a funny guy. Of course, Weird Al Yankovic is specifically comedy music, and there is a small subgenre of stuff that is comedy music, like Flight of the Conchords. But I think Weird Al Yankovic and Flight of the Conchords, there is a detachment to it. I'm sure there's tons of people that have had like really strong emotional reactions to Flight of the Conchords, which is really fun. Flight of the Conchords is my favorite band of all time. I cried so much the first time I heard Hip Hop-Hippopotamus. It was like they were speaking directly to... I'm sure somebody has felt that way about Weird Al Yankovic. Like, I'm sure... UHF is a comfort movie for me, but not because it provokes any... Actually, it does, it does sort of provoke an emotional response in me, but I think it's mostly nostalgia. Yeah, it'd be funny if someone has like a really strong emotional relationship to a Weird Al Yankovic album, besides just appreciating it for being funny. I could see, Frank Zappa asks you to take him seriously a lot more, or asks you to take his ideas seriously, but and while there are lots of emotional moments in Frank Zappa albums, I think he does carry himself with a certain detachment, which comes through a lot in his music. He sort of keeps you at an arm's length, and there is sort of eschewing an emotional quality of his music more for an intellectual quality, which is, I think, why people had like people like Lou Reed, who were nothing but pure emotion. I mean, they were very intellectual as well, but this guy that I think his idea of good music was like rawness. We need to, whatever raw is, we're trying to get to that, and he saw Frank Zappa as the opposite of that. And so I love Zappa, though. I think Zappa's fucking great. But Ween, on the other hand, even though their stuff is pastiche, and even though it's jokes, they still mean it, which is very interesting, because, what are you supposed to express if you are just like a goofy guy? What if the way that you show emotion, what if the way that you show depth and relatability and vulnerability is through humor, which is fucked up, because humor is supposed to diffuse stuff. It is supposed to keep people at arm's length. It's not supposed to, endear you or bind you to people in the same way that, something that is dramatic or sad or asked to be taken seriously can do. But I think Ween succeed in this, because if I were to really investigate how I feel, I am funny. Or like, I don't know if I am funny. Who knows if I am funny? But my inner thoughts are just really fucking goofy a lot of the time. Really goofy and stupid a lot of the time. So, what if that is just the emotional quality that is constantly surrounding me? And so what I can relate to, or how I relate to other emotions, is through that goofy stupidness, and it's nice to have someone like Ween where you can explore these other emotional tenors, but through your initial understanding of the world, which is of this sort of mundane stupidness. And, no other band is brave enough to be stupid. All other bands are presenting themselves as, oh, look at us, we're the big rock stars, we're sexy and we're larger than life and we'll do everything. But Ween are just guys. They're you. At least, I mean, they're me. And tons of people like me. But they feel as if, some people just got up on stage and were really good. There's no larger than life quality. There is always an intimacy to them that I think is irreplaceable, and which you don't get out of a lot of other bands, especially ones who reach their levels of success. I think there's still a weird level of intimacy. I guess that's why they get pigeonholed with the jam band people, because I think that's why people really like jam bands too. It's like, no matter how big Fish gets, it just seemed like a bunch of guys. It's just like you could go up to Trey Anastasio and not be intimidated by him and be like, hey, Trey. It's like, hey, I'm just a guy. I play guitar in this band called Fish. And I think that is the quality of the jam bands that attracts the audience. It does. There is a sort of unpretentiousness. You'd have to be unpretentious to like jam bands. So, that's the quality of it to begin with, And I think, Ween often plays the jam band circuit, even though I guess they do jam. But the thing about most jam bands is their studio albums are supposed to be terrible, and their live albums or their live performances is the real experience, But with Ween, their studio material matches up with their live material. Their live material is really good. I've seen them live a couple of times, and they always put on a great show. They do really great reinterpretations of stuff. They really do jam out. They do jam out a lot. I guess, maybe their jam band reputation is warranted, but who cares? Who cares? Is it really so embarrassing? There's an episode in my catalog, in the back catalog of this podcast, called In Defense of Fish. You can watch it. We defend Fish. Back on track to God, Ween, Satan, after, humor in music and, this talk about how that allows for an unpretentious appreciation of, other, more deeper, and a wider range of emotions through this humor. Humor is just the kaleidoscope. Humor is just the lens through which the gamut of human experience is watched through by Ween. Of course, they have the Boognish. I would be remiss if I didn't mention the Boognish as well, who comes up a lot on this album. The Boognish features a lot more in sort of the early mythology of Ween, because that's, something you make up when you're 20 years old. You have your own little mascot that you make up. You have your own little spiritual belief system that you make up, because you're doing some acid and you're thinking, what if there's a weird guy that ruled the world and he was the Boognish? And the Boognish is of course featured on the cover of God, Ween, Satan. That is the image of that, and it's a fitting entity to resemble Ween. Sort of this what is the quality of the Boognish? Electrified hair, like it's constantly excited, a vacant expression, gritting its long teeth, this is sort of a horrifying nightmare figure, but also excited and wired. And that is sort of like a good quality of Ween, sort of nightmarish, but very excited to be here, which is something that is lovely. I think, did Robert Christgau gave this a bomb, which is, I do not care for Robert Christgau. I think he's a loser. I think he's a loser myself, and he doesn't know what's good. No, he's got some good opinions. Well, everyone has different opinions. Who cares? You got Fat Lenny. I'll just start listing all the tracks. That's what I'll start doing. But on some songs, you can hear their talent for melody developing, for like composing, like what I would like almost like Beatles-esque quality, like Paul McCartney melodies. They eventually got really, really good at. And you can hear that on songs like Birthday Boy on this album, which is still like a huge song they play at their live sets. It's very featured because it's got a great melody. Yeah, great song. A lot of this is about women. I recognize. It's probably with just what they were writing about, what they were going through. I mean, that is the quality of being sort of like a dirtbag in a lonely place. You're just, talking about Nicole or Nan or Stacy. Or a common bitch, or you fucked up, you bitch. So there is a lot of sort of pining over women in this album. But I think that is the quality of being a dirtbag. Maybe that's what it does. I don't think Robert Christgau ever experienced this. He didn't experience what it was like just being sort of like a shitty, misshapen guy. I mean, he is a misshapen guy, but he probably, spent his child in curls, licking a very large lollipop. And, I don't think he had this New Hope, Pennsylvania upbringing or sort of avoided it. But yeah, if the songs aren't about women, they're about doing drugs. They're about what is Squelch the Weasel about? What is Marlip Tulip Juicy Tree about? I still don't know. But yeah, so yeah, drugs and just trying to get laid and being weird and paranoid. All of these feature into the first Ween album, which, is an album for the sort of pathetic 20-year-old in all of us, the eternal pathetic but wired and excited but nightmarish little 20-year-old in all of us. And I truly love it for that. I don't think anything captures that feeling better. On an episode of Chapo Trap House, probably their most famous episode, the one that is off-quoted, is the Hot Couch Guy episode, where Felix talks about the phenomena of a hot couch guy, a person whose house you go to, and their couch is really hot, and you for some reason you're always hanging out there, and listen to that episode. It's a very vivid description of a type of person that everybody knows or may have been. And I think I was a hot couch. I think a lot of us were hot couch guys, and I think there is no better. Ween is music for hot couch guys, which I probably must admit that I am. This is a years old Chaba. This is 5 years old. I'm really dating myself at this point, but I'm also dating myself by enjoying a band from 30 years ago, talking about an album from 33 years ago, made a year after I was born. But still, it resonated, It took 20 years for me to become 20, and it was the same experience that they were articulating. So if God, Ween, Satan has this sort of energetic, highly energetic quality to it, the pod is dismal and fucked up and sad, and you've stopped having the excitement of youth, and you are descending into your adulthood, and you are just realizing what is ahead of you, and you're not dealing with it well. And so your life just becomes about pleasure seeking by doing a lot of drugs and having these really slow, mundane, almost ambient experiences, and getting into these sort of manic states. Part of this album is another thing that I want to comment on throughout all of Ween is Gene Ween's voice, something that Aaron Freeman, something that Gene Ween will do, that some other vocalists will do, but not to the extent that he does, is literally change his voice. He'll like do a British accent, or he'll do like a Scottish accent, or he'll have a high quality singing voice, or he'll have an emotional sort of crooner voice, or he'll have like a high pitched tinny punk voice. You know, he's got like 1,000 of them. He's very it's strange to me that more vocalists don't try and do that. I guess because it is associated with humor, because that sort of mimicry is associated with the bass comedy instinct. You know, it is to be avoided. But I really do think, even in these early albums when they're not working with a lot and instrumentation doesn't vary from song to song, because Gene Ween changes his voice so much to different timbres, I think it really makes every song that much more unique and interesting. Of course, Dean Ween was equally capable of doing that with the guitar. But there is a very distinct Dean Ween guitar sound that usually features from track to track as well. Although, a huge part of why just Ween sounds so different from song to song is because of Gene Ween's vocal changing, and I wanted to call attention to that. So, God Ween Satan opens up with "You fucked up," really high energy. How does the pot open up? Strap on that jammy pack, you best of myself. Yeah, it's the most languorous. You know, I've just done a bunch of nitrous and I'm making a song, and this is it. The recording quality is even rougher than the first album, because I think this album they really just did record it themselves in like a single room, where they had studio time in the first album. This album, it was just on like a 4-track or something like that off of cassette tapes, and it sounds like it, but it sounds fucking great to my ears. You know, to my ears, that sort of woogly, fuzzy, especially because it has that tape quality. It has that analog hiss, that sort of, I like the sound of analog hiss better than digital hiss. Sue me. You know, the songs I make contain a lot of digital hiss, and I hate it. But I don't want to deal with tapes, so I deal with it. But yeah, there is a very slow downers quality to this album. And a really depressing quality. I was talking about stuff you couldn't do today. I mentioned Pollo Asado earlier, which is just Gene Ween doing a racist Mexican voice and ordering food. But God help me, it makes me laugh, because I felt like that. I think we've all felt like Pollo Asado. I think we've all been in a fucking Mexican restaurant, and it's really hot, and it's like the fluorescent light is shimmering, and it's really late at night, and there's a bunch of people there, and you're like a little drunk, and you're ordering the same thing over and over again, or there's someone in front of you and they're having a really long order, and you're just like staring up, and you can hear the buzzing of the fluorescence, and there's like that ambient quality, like that riff that Diener is doing in the background. Yeah, that it captures an emotional quality despite maybe the dated accent. I think it still is really good. I think it still really just gives attention to a feeling that not a lot of other music gives attention to, which is that sort of waiting around feeling of of being in a lonely place, of being in the suburbs, where that really is the quality of not much happening, where things seem repetitive and slow, and the things that happening are in front of you are sort of surreal in their smallness. It's just somebody ordering a pollo asado with a Mexican accent, but because it's so repetitive and because it's underscored in this way, because it has ascended to the level of art, almost like Duchamp's ready-made, ready-mades, it becomes accentuated, but never fantasized. You are in that feeling. You are in that restaurant. You are not experiencing the idea of that restaurant blown up to massive size. Yes. What are other songs on here that I like? Some are just, some Ween songs are just like looped, which they would eventually they would just release a whole album of basically these loop songs in Shinola Volume 1, which was outtakes. But, they'll have something like The Fucked Jam on Quebec, where they just have these things that are very simple loops. But I also sort of like these. They'll have a track on here is Awesome Sound. Got an awesome sound. That's going down. That's what they say over and over and over and over again. And but I think that also contributes to that quality of that repetitive, just crushing, sort of indistinct quality of living in those lonely places. And this album is even though there's songs about women on it, it's much less pining for women and more about I don't know, approaching them in weird, like songs like Molly. It's gone beyond, wanting women and more about, just thinking about them in excessively weird ways. Other than that, it's these characters that Jeaner and Diener inhabit, or when they're in the pod and when they're, huffing their nitrous oxide from that gas mask on the cover, which, they never actually did. But they tried to think of very dirtbag stuff that they could do. What's the most dirtbag possible thing that we could think about when trying to, make this album, which is all about this sort of depressed, druggish, endless quality of lonely suburban living. So that's what they came up with. But yeah, in these reveries, in these fantasies, they go to they become Dr. Rock. Or they become the Stallion. This is the first appearance of the Stallion. And its initial voice, I am the Stallion. I am the Stallion. Just a ranting madman obsessed with himself, which is where you would go to on these reveries. You become Captain Fantasy, I think this album is really, really long and can get really, really boring if you don't have the metal for. I love it. This is probably my second favorite Ween album of all time, next to Quebec, because I think this is the one that most captures the quality of being young. You don't have any money. You can't go anywhere. Your life is just junk food and doing drugs and like watching TV. And like making little songs, and and like thinking about sex in a weird way, and that's it. And that sort of dismal, repetitive, boring, crushing quality is so embodied by this album. More so than the first album, that I really can't think of another album that has quite this emotional tenor, or just captures what it's like being an average exurban dirtbag so well. There's nothing like it. Maybe like an Insane Clown Posse record is one of the things that might come close to that. But at least for me, this was my experience. This was my experience to a T, and I don't know if that's good or not, but who cares? Who cares? Moving on to Pure Guava. Somehow, they got a record deal. I shouldn't say somehow. I know how, because Nirvana got big, and suddenly everyone was like, this indie music is big now. Who can we give record deals to? We'll give record deals to Ween. And then somehow I guess not somehow. It's a great little song, but you wouldn't expect it to chart as high as it did. Their highest charting single ever, I believe, came from this album, which is "Push the Little Daisies." A great song. Has a weird video. Gene's being real cute in it. Dean and Gene being real cute in it. I don't know who the lady is in it, but she seems all right. Features the signature sped up vocals. Push the little daisies and make them come up. Push a little daisy, but it's not even the strongest song of the album. But man, this album's really good. Pure Guava, people don't consider. I think all the Ween albums are really good, but just looking at this track list and like how all of these songs stick in my head with the pod, it's sort of hard to recall individual songs. They sort of blend together, but they're really getting their melody chops on. The song off of this that everyone fucking loves. Yeah, and that one of the stronger songs on the album, and sort of a shift from the Stallion character, which is a song that I assume they probably, it sounds highly improvised, but it's great, is the Stallion Part 3. Mach 10 at sudden speed, flying into the wind now. I'm floating at your feet, something a likeness to you now. Yes. This album is sort of a return to Godween Satan, where it's a bit more energetic. It has less of that sort of crushing, depressing feeling, but it's still very much about. It still retains the lo-fi quality of the first two albums, which is very funny. It's super funny to get big label money from Elektra and then be like, nah, we're gonna make our album sound like the last two ones that we recorded with $5. That's such a good move, but it worked. They got a really high charting single. I mean, high charting for them. It charted like 21 in the US alt stuff, but that was good. That's really good for them, especially in the 90s when people actually bought music. That was a real sign of something. Yeah, all of these songs are, think about, it's maybe an overlooked song in their category, but I think Pumpin' for the Man is almost like a good thesis statement for the New Hope trilogy, for the first three albums, because it really just illustrates in this really short, snappy song, what is the geography of this place in which they're taking all of their all of these emotional cues from. What is their daily life like, and I don't know if they were still pumping gas by the time Pure Guava came out. I'm sure this was a job they had, or they knew lots of people who were pumping gas. But think of these lyrics. It's a 9-mile walk from the office to the pumps. Sometimes you think you're going to drop. In the end, you're filthy, dirty, horny, and pissed off, and before you can leave, you got to sweep the fucking shop. It's a real bitch to be working for the band, but shit, I do it well, so what the fuck? I could probably wash dishes at some other fucking dump, but it's all the same to me, busting ass to make a buck. So read 'em up and stick 'em, pump that fucker good. Some woman down on Main Street needs a jump. Get your fingers out and pump some faggots gas and think about how bad New Hope sucks. I don't think, obviously, the F slur. The 90s were a different time, people. The 90s were a different, but also, that's what it is being a dirtbag. You say the F slur when you're in these fucking towns. Think about how bad New Hope. Get your fingers out your ass and pump some F slurs gas, and think about how bad New Hope sucks. That's it. That's wherever you are. Are you in Omaha, Nebraska? Are you in some extant part of Omaha, Nebraska? Are you in are you in Mississauga, Ontario? Are you in some horrible town in Northern Virginia? Are you in are you in Garland, Texas? This is a universal that's what it is. You're just slogging and working, and you're just thinking about how bad the town you're from is in. And that's not like one of the more well-known songs from this album. Probably the one that's most well-known is "Don't Get Too Close to My Fantasy." It probably It's the best song on this album, the one that comes up at live sets the most. It's a big, talk about getting big and epic, but still, it's not that. The only thing that's big and epic about it is the fact that there's lots of choral overdubs on Gene. The instrumentation is pretty, just basic rock instrumentation, but it eventually ends with that big choral moment. Don't get too close to my fantasy. Don't be afraid to touch the hand of your creator. And so, I think in that message, it's funny that they end the album on Poop Ship Destroyer, which is also a staple of their live sets, actually, which is another one of their sort of jam songs that's just sort of like a strange loop over and over again. But I think the phrase Poop Ship Destroyer is very funny to them, and it's also very funny to me. What is a poop ship? How do you destroy it? Is it the Poop Ship Destroyer or the Poop Ship Destroyer? The destroyer, either way. But that's what Ween will do. They'll usually have like a big song to be the second song of the album, and then end it with like a little joke, a little diffusing joke, similar to like Abbey Road ends with the end and then Her Majesty. This is their version of that. Although Pure Guava, it's not as serious as they would eventually become, or it's not as demanding a seriousness as it would eventually become. But, I remember the choruses to all of these. Is it clear in my head? Touch my tutor, smoocher, loving you through it all, bad and good. Love it, I remember all of these. They really... once again, they have this quality. Now I'm going to compare them to Steely Dan, whereas Steely Dan has these sort of epic loser characters. The world of Ween is populated by the people you just meet in New Hope, Pennsylvania. Someone like Big Jilm, or someone like the Reggae Junkie Jew. I don't know if that's bad, but like I said, I am Jewish myself. I know a Jewish fella who is into reggae, and he did a bunch of drugs. He was like, and he was talking to pseudo patois, and it was like, it's amazing. There's this guy, and he repeats over and over again. And Ween also met this guy in New Hope, Pennsylvania. And I think that's just great. But I love this song. The song, just a fucking gorgeous song. You'd be shocked that they wrote it. It just comes right in the middle of the album. And on this, Pure Guava is very unserious, compared to some of the other albums. Like, compared to The Pod before it, which actually sort of, because of its dismalness, gets sort of depressing and sluggish at times, almost industrial and fucked up. This album is very, like, get up and go, I mean, one of the songs is even The Going Gets Tough from the Get-Go. It's very bouncy. It's, very, very poppy. And then in the middle of it comes this shockingly gorgeous ballad, Sarah, this beautiful melody. And when I find you in your sleep, Sarah. I can't do it. I'm not doing it well. But the point is, it's really fucking beautiful. And they were capable of doing stuff like this, this early into their career, just after 2 albums. They were still just 22 when this album released, and very auspicious indeed. What's also funny about this album is Don't Get Too Close to My Fantasy, which was featured in the It's Pat movie. If anyone remembers It's Pat. It's Pat was the character played by Julia Sweeney on Saturday Night Live, who was, the gag is that they were androgynous, and no one could tell what gender they were. And they made one of what is supposed to be one of the worst movies of all time in it, but it had Ween in it. And I've seen the Ween scenes from It's Pat, and no other scenes from It's Pat Do they play? No, they play Pork Roll, Egg, and Cheese. Actually, in It's Bad. I think I think they also play Don't Get Too Close to My Fantasy, but I could be wrong about that. Who knows? Who cares? Either way, man, the Robert Kreisgau review. I don't know why I'm harping on Kreisgau so much. He gave this one a C+, which was better than the bombs he gave. Negative. Finding the band wrote their fucked up songs without thinking and how. He went on to disparagingly call them the kind of rec room giggle fritzes who enjoy a good N-word joke. He actually uses the word when they're sure their audience is sophisticated enough to enjoy it. And to be perfectly honest, I don't hear one of those on here. What? I don't understand his writing. It's what? He seems like he enjoys a good. He's the one who enjoys those jokes more than he lets on. But they wrote their fucked up songs without. The point is they write them without thinking. It's a sensuous experience. They're channeling the experience of being a dirtbag. Something that doesn't seem like you ever were, of being like a dumbass dirtbag. I guess that's why you don't like it. I mean, you just said sort of traits you feel are indicative of dirtbags, and I guess that's bad. But you never were kind of shitty, Robert Kreisgau. You never were a shitty 20-year-old. You never experienced that. Either way. It's funny. I only started liking the first three albums after I was in my 20s, or had by the age of 22. I started appreciated them more because my first introduction to Ween was when I was 16, I believe, and I heard Chocolate and Cheese for the first time because I knew they had been on South Park. I knew that, I heard the title of the song Spinal Meningitis got me down. And that, instantly, flipped a switch in me because I'm a very hypochondriacal person. Hypochondriac? I don't know. I am a hypochondriac. And so, a lot of my childhood was just spent looking up the names of various diseases. And so anything that had like a specific and horrible disease name in it, I was like, this has sort of piqued my interest. And so I listened to the song, and it's horrible. It's like a nightmare of a song. Spinal Meningitis got me down. It's sort of a funk song. It has the sped up voice, so Gene is made to sound like a child. It's got, I gotta see my spine, mommy. Much worse than last time. Shine almighty Jesus. The Spinal Meningitis, and a great chorus, fucking great chorus. I love that shit. Great fucking guitar solo at the end. Amazing tone Dean gets out of it. And Spinal Meningitis was the first Ween song I ever heard, and it instantly hooked me because it was like there was nothing I had ever heard like that. Nothing as so self-consciously goofy, but also sort of terrifying in a way. But of course, that's only one song on the album because now they have real production value on their albums. They've taken the studio money, they've taken the label money, they've decided to be real studio heads, and they've really the quality of sound, the quality of studio production between Pure Guava and Chocolate and Cheese is insane. Now they sound like. Now they sound like a real fucking band. They don't just sound like your friend's band that got famous somehow. Your friends from school that got, that toured a little. Now they sound like they're like a legitimate fucking band. Not to downplay the old albums, which I think are all 10 out of 10s for me, but part of their appeal is that they are lo-fi and they sound like something that you could have made. This is something that has a lot more polish on it, and they sort of after the success of Push the Little Daisies, they made a real bid at more MTV success. Voodoo Lady charted really high, not really high, but it charted pretty high on the alt charts, but I think that was their last single to ever chart was Voodoo Lady off of this album. I think the first single they chose off of this is I Can't Put My Finger on It, which is a very bold move because that is a very abrasive song where Gina is singing in this really metallic, tinny voice. But yeah, just the stylistic variation, because they're really using the studio money, the label money well, to amp up the stylistic variation as much as possible. They can hire session musicians now to really make their songs sound different. They can hire people that have different stylistic influences. They can also, I keep talking about only their songs that wouldn't fly today. There's the HIV song where they just go AIDS, and then they have a bouncy little melody in between it, which I'm sure is fucking hilarious for the people in the 90s. But I bet many people wouldn't appreciate it now, or maybe that joke seems a little dated now. But that's also what hooked me to this album, is when I was 16, I had never heard something just as stupid as that, where they say AIDS. Dun 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 HIV. It still gets me. I know I should be sensitive, but I'm sorry, I'm a shithead. What do you want? They still preserve that sense of humor. But tons of now they're like genius melodists at this point. They really know how to they have that McCartney-like ability to make these instantly catchy fucking melodies that move around and stick in your head. Spinal Meningitis, Freedom of 76, Roses Are Free, Baby Bitch, Mr. Would You Please Help My Pony, Voodoo, all of these songs have these just you hear them once and they have that instantly catchy quality. That same quality that the Beatles had, where it's just, they had this amazing ability to come up with these sort of simplistic but ingenious melodies that, or the Cobain quality, where he could come up with these simplistic but ingenious melodies, which you only need to hear once in order to fully internalize. They're really coming into their own with that shit here, which would later, get even better. While I like this album, it is this is where their stylistic diversity can sort of negatively affect them, because this album doesn't have the same sort of cohesiveness that the lo-fi quality of the previous three albums had, because now their diversity of sound, which has always been their greatest strength, is now slightly working against them here, because if there really is no I can't really spot out a theme to Chocolate and Cheese. I can't really ring out a theme to it as well. It just is we have a bunch of money now, so let's do experiments. Let's try and experiment and get much better at our songwriting craft by really closing in on a bunch of different styles and trying to... Yeah, that's basically what it feels. This is we're getting better at our craft album in many different ways, but it is lacking that sort of unified continuity of those previous three albums that they had as a result of their sort of more lower-fi, less expensive, and thus, less varied production. But, let's move on from Chocolate and Cheese to one of their lesser talked about albums, which is very funny. They released Chocolate and Cheese, which I think up till that point had been their most successful album. I'm sure it was helped by its suggestive cover art. But then they decided to do a country album, which is a very, very funny move. They actually went to Nashville and hired a bunch of country musicians, and they did a full album of country songs, which is this is Ween, where the sort of I love this album too, but I think here the songs are more pastiche than they are deeply felt emotions on Ween's part, because I think they're trying to embody these cowboy characters. Obviously, there's still lots of their Pennsylvania dirtbag roots in here, which you can hear in like Piss Up a Rope, or You Were the Fool, or Help Me Scrape the Mucus Off My Brain. You can still hear their sensibilities within the song, but in this case it really feels like they're trying to do justice to the homage, and in doing so this is the quality of like humorous music that people point to sometimes, where it does have that sort of detachment, because it is doing something that is necessarily outside the emotional capabilities or the stylistic capabilities of the people doing it. I'm sure if they had stuck with the country sound, they probably would have. I'm sure if they became Nashville people, they would have stuck with it. But I listened to this yesterday because it's the one that I've probably, it and La Cucaracha are the ones that I've listened to the least, and probably the ones that most Ween fans have listened to the least. But I mean, even this album, you will find people this is their favorite Ween album, or especially. I'm sure lots of country fans have not lots of country fans, probably not lots, but I'm sure a bunch of country people have gotten into Ween because of how good this album, and that's the thing, they really do pull off they do sound like a legitimate country band. It doesn't sound like they're faking it at all. It really does feel like they put in the work and put in the effort to make a really professional sounding Nashville album, which is why it's funny that they're putting all of this effort into songs that are as goofy as Japanese Cowboy. But also there are gestures once again towards deeper emotional qualities on this, like in Powder Blue or Fluffy, that would later come to fruition on this next album. Is I said The Pod is my second favorite album, but it's probably The Mollusk, then The Pod, because The Mollusk is just back to front, just a fucking wonderful. Every song is good. Every song is immediately catchy. The diversity is held together by the stupid nautical concept. I call it stupid, but stupid in like the best way possible. When a joke is funny to you and you say that's fucking stupid, because you're laughing at how silly it is. You say that's fucking stupid, and it starts out with "I'm dancing in the show tonight" with this slight vaudeville number with Ween's voice, with Jeaner's voice changing over. This is all time. Have I got a key? And it's sort of nauseating and disorienting. From what I've heard, this album is about gay pirates. Like, the concept is actually, I might be wrong about that, but someone told me that once. I think my friend of the show, Steve, might have told me once that this album is about gay pirates. This album also probably contains their most well-known song, which is Ocean Man. Of course, it's well-known because it was featured in SpongeBob SquarePants, but you hear it once and it's like, I love Ocean Man. It's a great song. Ocean Man, taken to the hand, limit to the land. I'm singing all the songs instead of playing clips from the music because I don't want to edit it in, and you can hear my poorly remembered versions of Ween songs instead. Me singing it. That's much better. But yeah, I'm dancing in the show tonight. It starts out with a jokey open, but it is like a pretty good intro because it's like it's almost like this is their Sgt. Pepper's in a lot of ways, which is funny because their next album we called White Pepper. But it does have that we're presenting. This is the show. There's a big theatrical quality to it. They've long discarded. This is we're not in New Hope anymore. They've been touring for a while. They have money now. They don't feel like those sort of lost 20-year-olds. Now they're sort of in a different place, or they're wanting to explore, something greater. But the Mollusk I think is interesting because I do think they're like, if it's true it's about gay pirates, I think there is like a real, there is a queer element to this. obviously the first track, the mollusk. Hey, the D-boy, what you got there? Kind sir, it's a mollusk affair. Did you find it on the sandy ground, emulating the ocean, sir? Yes, is the mollusk a euphemism for something, maybe? Or even, polka dot tail, or I'll be your Johnny on the spot, or mutilated lips, or the golden eel, or replete with phallic imagery, or, Cold Blows the Wind, where Jenner takes it's an old poem that they're drawing from, but Jenner singing in his voice takes the perspective of a woman. So, there's queer elements all over this album. Or even, Waving My Dick in the Wind, a song about waving your dicks, the only other person is mentioned is old Jimmy Wilson. Sure enough, he's got what it takes. So I maybe that's why this was the album that I listened to over and over and over again. Because of the secret homoeroticism of it. I was drawn to it. Or I could be absolutely wrong about this, so disabuse me of this notion if I'm wrong. But yeah, it's crazy how every song has an incredible melody. Every song sounds different, but still cohesive. Every song is like there is sort of a seriousness demanded by the enhanced production value and by the fact that, not every song is so jokey. Not every song is I'm reading on the Wikipedia now. Kurt Weill says that Mutilated Lips is his favorite song of all time off of this album, which is a very good choice, Kurt Weill. My estimation of you increased tenfold upon reading this little Wikipedia entry. Even like Pink Eye on My Leg, it has those little barking sounds, but it has those bubble and synth sounds. The whole nautical theme of it is like, I remember reading the review of this by Mark Prindle, and this album, he also sort of talks about how this album is sort of a prog rock album. They're trying to do they're a big concept album, but in their case, their big concept album is about gay pirates. And he said, he was talking about, there's sort of like, there can be an annoying or preening or pretentious quality to a lot of prog rock, but, on that first ELO album, you get the song Lucky Man. And that song is just a perfect little fucking pop song that these prog nerds wrote. And he said this album, The Mollusk, is all Lucky Man. It's just, if a prog rock band could only write those like little tight 3-minute songs that sometimes they write and are really good at, and then arranged it into an effective concept album, this would be it. Yeah. And, even like down to the album cover, which was designed by Storm Thorgerson, who you would know for designing the Dark Side of the Moon album cover and many others, there is this homage to prog rock in it. But yeah, I think this album is just fucking great. Every album is 10 out of 10 for me, but this is a 10 plus. This one so far is, this and The Pod are the first 10 pluses thus far that I want to I would like to identify as the ones that I find most special to me. There's 3 of them. And the other one is coming up later. You have The Mollusk, and then so they have 9 studio albums, and I think Chocolate and Cheese, 12 Golden Greats, and The Mollusk, they form a neat little trilogy of their own. We might count Craters of the Sack, but that's an MP3 only album. It's good. There's got lots of good stuff on it, but because it's not an official studio album, and because I'm already, over on time, I'm going to limit what I have to say. We've sort of left now. What this era, the middle era of Ween, I call the pastiche era. And that's when they're really, really getting good at that sort of pastiche style that would define them. They've sort of departed from that sensuous dirtbag New Hope feeling into like, what sounds what can we do to expand our sonic palette as much as possible. And in doing so, eventually going from Chocolate and Cheese, where they expanded in sort of this experimental but disconnected way, 12 Golden Country Greats, where they really try and hammer home more emotional or more serious attempts at this pastiche, and sort of combining the two eventually in the Mollusk, to great effect, is that's part of that phase. And that's when they were probably making the most money of their career, and they were at the height of their tourings and selling a lot of records. But now we enter the last three albums, what I call the adult phase. They turn 30 and they're adults now, and sort of the music reflects that. It becomes sort of slower, more languid, more laid back, less edgy. Long gone is that Boognish with its gritted teeth and its shocking hair. Now is exactly where I'm at, or I love you even if you don't. There are a few punk songs on this album like Stroker Ace, but mostly they've and how they would sustain this quality, there would be like one really up-tempo song on the whole album, and the rest of it would be this very this sort of almost like Steely Danish. They hit 30 and they started making sort of laid back, jazzier, almost jazzier Steely Danish music. So but this album is, it's called White Pepper, obviously a nod to the White Album and Sgt. Pepper. This was their attempt to create really Beatlesy pop, which is sort of, I wouldn't call this the music that they make Beatlesy. There is some qualities like Even If You Don't, which had a very funny video directed by Trey Parker. They have that sort of quarter note piano chug that sort of gets associated with Britpop, but Even If You Don't sounds more like a Hall & Oates song, which is doesn't sound necessarily that Beatlesy, but of course their stylistic diversity is still at play. I think this album also has the same issue as Chocolate and Cheese, where there isn't really as much of a definable theme to it, or there's as much of a cohesive theme. There's some absolutely like fucking beautiful tracks on here. I always love the instrumental Ice Castles on this with its weird detuned woogly guitar. I think it's absolutely gorgeous. And some of the songs are like Stay Forever, just such a fucking gorgeous melody. I guess Falling Out is the one that's that's obviously supposed to be a 1965 John Lennon song. But I think, man, Stay Forever is so fucking good. I love that song so much. It's so beautiful. And that's what they would eventually good at, is like this is the best part of their era, which they would eventually come to on the next album. Just they started writing really beautiful, somehow they started writing beautiful music, as evidenced as far back as Sarah on Pure Guava. They had it in them, but I guess it takes becoming older and sort of a little softer and having your 20s kick your ass and like just doing a lot of drugs and getting fucked up to just want to take stuff slower and want to explore that more sort of vulnerable or like beautiful or sad side of yourself. So I think that's something that they really started exploring on this album, and would eventually come to a head with their next album. My favorite of Ween's albums, I think probably it might be my favorite album of all time, but this is like the combination of everything that they've done so far. It has that same like dismal quality, only they're not 20-year-olds anymore. They're 33 now, and they're both having like in horror, like their relationships are both ending. They're both having horrible drug problems at this time. Touring is taking a huge toll on their bodies. They're both really unhappy when they're making this album. From what I've read about it, and it's like that, just getting your ass kicked quality. I even said, Mark Prindle named Quebec the best album of the 2000s when he was on Fox News with Greg Gutfeld, it's funny that he was on there. But he's right, Mark Prindle. I think this is the best album of the 2000s. I think this could be the best album of all time. I would definitely put my hand up and say, what is the best album of all time? I'd be like, maybe it's Ween's Quebec. Maybe that is the best album of all time. But in terms of like, just like this, they're genuinely vulnerable now. Like it's still through the lens of humor, but more so than ever, they've like dropped the facade, and they're really everything is almost everything is from the heart. Even It's Gonna Be a Long Night, the sole punk song on the album, which opens and it's very funny that It's Gonna Be a Long Night opens the album, because it's like, oh, this is gonna be a fucked up album. It's gonna be like really raw and punk, and there's no other song that has that tenor. It's all really downbeat for the rest of it, except for Hey There Fancy Pants right in the middle. Everything is like at a very slow BPM. And it's really, it starts taking on almost like this ambient quality, or like it has the like depressing quality of the Pod as well, but it has the production value that they've built up all over these years, and that sort of, it has its cohesiveness, because the album is all about basically a relationship ending. And having a really bad time where a relationship is going to end, where it, almost comes full circle. From God, Ween, Satan, you have, these high-strung, little, like, know-nothing stupid kids, pining juvenilely for women. Now they've experienced love, and they're coming out the other end of it, having these difficulties, these real human, understandable difficulties. I think, as all of us face in our 30s, when we get our ass kicked by our 20s, and, now we're sort of reckoning with what it's like to really be tired for the first time in our lives, like really, really be tired. And that's what a lot of this album is. It starts off with It's Gonna Be a Long Night, which is just, we're gonna do drugs, and then it's just which is a great song to start. Here's the night, it's gonna do drugs, and then the next 14 songs are this massive hangover of like, oh jeez, oh fuck, and you have the upbeat song about doing drugs to start us off, and then immediately Zoloft, give me that Zoloft, and a lot of this album is about prescription medication. And, the fucked up effects of prescription medication. Happy Colored Marbles. This is a very SSRI's album, which is, also intimately relatable for a lot of us who got to take those goddamn meds. Yeah, this is sort of an answer to the Pod in a way, because it's just as dismal. Whereas the Pod was about doing dirtbag drugs, this is about doing drugs your therapist prescribed, your psychiatrist prescribes you, because you got fucked up. You fucked up your dopamine doing too many drugs while touring, and now you're all weird and sad, and you're sort of weird and maladjusted as an adult. And so that manifests in having all of these really slow, ambient sounding, textural songs, interspersed throughout these more traditional songs with like melodies that move around a lot more. You'll have stuff like Among His Tribe, or like Captain, or Alkin Road, where they're very moody and spacey, and Ween is demanding you to take them seriously, really, in a way they never had before. And it's funny that they have the confidence to do this now. And this is the only album they really ever do it on. Like, they have songs in which they demand seriousness on some previous albums, but they really demanded a lot more on this album. Like, there are songs on here which just don't even have, like, a joker quality to them. Like Alkin Road, Argus, If You Could Save Yourself, I Don't Want It, Chocolate Town, Captain, Happy Colored Marbles, Tried and True, So Many People. These are, like, desperately honest, harrowing songs about losing your mind while everything is falling apart around you and the fucking pills don't help. And who among us has not experienced that? And, you talk about how the pod is, like, one of the best emotional sense memories of somebody being a fucked up dirtbag in their early 20s and having the responsibility of their life ahead of them, daunt on them and make them act in fucked up ways. This is perfectly the sound of being in your 30s and having, like, your first attempts at adulthood sort of fall apart, and, where are you left after that? And that's why I think this album is great. It's a breakup album, basically. And one of the finest there is. As good as Blood on the Tracks, as good as Sea Change, it deserves to be considered to be one of the finest albums of all time. Quebec. I can't say enough good things about it. And, of course, we have to talk about the Ween studio album story. Doesn't end with a bang, but with sort of a minor way. I like La Cucaracha. La Cucaracha, I should say, is a fine album. It's a good album, but it's definitely does not reach the heights of Quebec. It feels, it feels a lot more like Shinola in some ways, which is their Outtakes album, which I didn't talk about. An album which I also love, but the Shinola songs are very fragmentary. Almost feel like high quality versions, studio versions of Godween Satan songs. And I guess that's sort of what La Cucaracha feels like as well. The songs feel very fragmentary. It's very funny how, like, their albums almost mirror each other back to front, and they pivot on 12 Golden Country Greats, which is like nothing else in the Ween catalog. But the Mollusk and Chocolate and Cheese mirror each other. Pure Guava and White Pepper mirror each other, and so does La Cucaracha. It does feel like they've come out the other end, and they're back at this sort of fragmentary, sort of high-strung style. And they use a lot of the synth work on this album is a little grating. I gotta say, I think they probably weren't making as much money at this time, which is funny because it's interesting. This is their highest charting album of all time. It got to 69, yeah, in the U.S. Billboard 100, which is the highest charting position of any album of theirs, which is crazy to me. Because this is, among Ween fans, is generally not their most well-received album. But, and it came out in 2007 when, charting higher meant less than it had in the past. But still, people were still buying albums, at least more than they do now in 2007. But, hey, this has lots of fucking tracks that fuck on it. It's got Blue Balloon, it's got Object, it's got My Own Bare Hands, it's got The Fruit Man, which is okay. Let me say something about The Fruit Man. That's quite possibly the most racist song that Ween ever did, and it came right on the last album. And in 2007, which was like 3 years away before you really couldn't get away with that stuff anymore. I don't talk about The Fruit Man anymore, but I was listening to it yesterday. I was like, it's wow. What are they gonna do? It has a big epic jam at the end in Woman and the Man, and then has their single Your Party, which is okay. I think I would have chosen My Own Bare Hands to be the single. That's like they're really cool. I like Shame Maker as well, but yeah, just a fun and sort of like this album really doesn't have anything holding it together. I do not know what the concept of this is album at all. I don't think there is any theme, but that sort of once again brings it in line. You sort of you exhaust that potential with Quebec, which is if you just made one of the greatest albums of all time, of course it's going to be hard to follow it up. Of course, Ween fans, since 2007, we've wanted another album. The last ever Ween material was released was a demo off of this album. I just think DC Won't Do You No Good or something to that effect. Came out in 2010, and we've had 13 years without any Ween material. They've been touring. They got back together. They ended stuff for a while. Jenner put out some solo material, which is pretty good, but who knows? Maybe they got it in them, maybe they don't. Either way, even La Cucaracha, which is probably their least well-received album, is still pretty fucking great. I think, I said all of these albums are 10 out of 10. La Cucaracha may be like a 9 out of 10 for me. But, fucking, none of the albums are bad. Can you think of another band that released 9 albums and none of them are bad? That's crazy. That's an amazing fucking... What an amazing thing they did, I am in awe of their ability to just be so fucking spontaneous and creative and filled with humor, and to really articulate what it's like for someone like me to just be living a stupid, quiet, mundane existence in a lonely place. Because it is through the lens of humor. And I love you, Ween. You have made my life so much better, and I hope you will love Ween as well.